Hey everybody, today we are going to service a Mercury Verado 5.4 gear case. We'll change the shift shaft seals, the drive shaft seals, and the prop shaft seals. Enjoy the video. First thing to do is have the gear case tilted backwards to allow the gear lube to drain properly. Remove the two 10mm bolts with the gaskets. Make sure you find all of the pieces of the seal. You don't want any of them left on the case or on the bolt. Then make sure you replace both of these gaskets every time you service your lower unit. Now to remove the water pump, just remove these four 10mm bolts and pull the housing with the impeller off together. Grab the keyway and pull the pump housing plate and gaskets off as well. Now for all of these seals, we need to pressure test the gear case to see which ones we need to change. Change these as needed. If there's not water in the gear lube, I would leave them alone. Install the lower drain plug. Now with the pressure tester in the vent hole, pump it up to roughly 12 psi. Then add some soapy water to all of the seals and look for air bubbles. After identifying the leak, we will start with the drive shaft seals. There is a retainer around the carrier. Use some lubricating oil and spin it around to get one end of it in the front. Then carefully pry it up and around to remove it. Then take two screwdrivers or punches and together pry up on the carrier using the two indents that are in it. The carrier comes as an assembly, so if it is stuck, just hammer your punches a little bit into the carrier indents and pry it out. Grease up the O-ring on the new carrier and twist it while pressing down until it slides into place. Then from one end of the ring, work it around to seat it back in place. Now we'll change the shift shaft seal. Remove the retaining ring the same as we did with the carrier ring, then remove the four 10mm bolts holding the housing down. Use the tip of a Phillips screwdriver and carefully wiggle it around to loosen the housing. Then take a flat head and gently pry up on the housing. While holding the housing, take your screwdriver and pry out the seal like this. Then clean the surface and insert the new seal. Using a socket, seat the seal firmly down and then pop the retaining ring back in. Make sure that this O-ring is here on the bottom of the housing, put some grease on it, then replace the gasket that goes under the housing and push the housing back into place. Grease up the bolts, get them started, and then tighten them down. This is where it gets tricky. The prop shaft seals are different in difficulty to change depending on which gear case you have. Both the 4.8 and 5.4 bearing carrier assemblies must be removed to change the prop shaft seals. This should be performed by a professional. If not done correctly, the gear case could leak and eventually blow up. Begin by removing this set screw, which is a 3 32 inch Allen head. Then remove this ring by using a roll pin and hammer to get it spinning off, then just spin it off. Bend the locking tab down using a chisel and hammer, then with the drain screws out, remove the retaining nut. Use lots of Kroil or PB Blaster or some sort of penetrating oil. If the nut won't come out, carefully drill holes in it until you can knock it out in pieces. Be careful not to drill into the threads that are on the gear case housing. With that removed, you can take out this tab washer. You will need a puller jaw assembly. This big one here from Snap-on works like a dream. Get it set and screw it down until the carrier begins to slide out. Make sure you don't lose the spacer or shims that are on the prop shaft. Once we get the carrier out, turn the reverse gear while pulling out on it until you feel the tabs line up and the bearing comes out of the carrier. Then remove the tapered bearing from inside the carrier. Using a roll pin punch, carefully knock the seals out, but be careful not to hit the bearing race and scratch it. Now take the first prop shaft seal, put some gasket sealing compound on it, stick it in the carrier with the lips of the seal facing outward. Using a piece of PVC piping, push the seal down until it seats. Push the next seal in the same way but with the lips of the seal facing inward. Put the bearing back in the carrier, put a new O-ring on the spacer, and then put the gear back in. Turn it a quarter turn so that the tabs hold it in. Clean inside the gear case where the carrier sits, as well as the threads where the retaining nut goes. Then grease up the O-ring and outsides of the carrier. Stick your finger in the carrier to hold the bearing up and in the proper position. Then with the prop shaft sticking straight up in the air, carefully put the carrier into the case and get the bearing onto the prop shaft. With the carrier facing the correct direction, push it into the case and twist it a little to get the O-ring to slide into place. Look through the exhaust here to see if it has seated properly or if the O-ring is caught up. Reinstall the tab washer. Grease up the retaining nut and start it by hand. Torque the nut down to 100 foot-pounds, then to 210 foot-pounds, and then an additional 1.5 or to where the lock washer tab will bend up into a slot on the nut. Then after installing the torpedo ring and tightening the set screw, tilt the lower unit forward and begin filling the gear case until you get a solid stream of lube coming out of the top. Install the top drain plug, then after tightening it, quickly install the lower drain plug. Now we will put the impeller back on and finish up the service. You want to take the 3 pieces that make the water pump housing plate. There's a little hole here at the top, and we need to make sure that the plate and bottom gasket line up so you can see through it. Put them here on the gear case. You can get guides like these to assist with the assembly. Part number will be in the description. Put some grease on the drive shaft to help hold the keyway on, then push the impeller down looking at the slot where the keyway goes and push it down to the plate. Then put the housing on and being mindful of the gasket, turn the drive shaft in a counter rotation motion while pushing down on the housing until it slides all the way down. Check the gasket and then grease up the bolts and put all 4 back in. Don't forget to install the rubber grommet on top of the housing. And that completes the water pump impeller and gear case service with all of the seals. If this video helped you out, hit the like button and make sure you're subscribed to help get you through all of your DIY boating and outboard servicing needs. If there's something you'd like help with, drop a comment below and we'll see you on the next one.